All right, moving forward. So we now heard about defense and we've heard about cybersecurity from the national perspective with the Ukraine story, from personal perspective with Elvis' presentation, and now also from the organizational perspective just now. And moving forward, we're going to take another perspective, and that's going to be the investment perspective. So the next session is called The Investment Battlefield, Shaping the Future of Defense, where the future of defense is not just predicted, but actively shaped by the decisions of today's investors, and you're going to meet a few of them today. This engaging session will bring to light the strategic visions and debates among the key players in defense sector investments, offering insights into the emerging technologies and market dynamics that could redefine security measures, not only in Europe, but worldwide.
So to welcome the speakers, welcoming to the stage the first speaker, also the moderator of the discussion, Tomass Pildegovičs, PhD candidate in politics and international relations at University of Cambridge.
And welcome Tomass with applause.
Please take a seat. And continuing, let's welcome to the stage one of our speakers, Nicholas Nelson, partner at MD1 Ventures. And next up, Jack Wang, principal at Project A. Welcome, Jack.
Yes.
And final but not the least, Kadri Tamai, head of NATO Diana, Estonian Accelerator. Welcome. So please take a seat. The stage is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for showing up. Really appreciate it. We have an excellent set of speakers here for you today, and I will try to be brief and not get in the way of your brilliance, not to get in the way too much. Perhaps, Kadri, we can start with you, since we do have, I imagine, a predominantly civilian audience. Actually, it's not a stretch to say the vast majority of the people here are working in the civilian space. I was wondering if you could tell a bit about this growing trend of founders converting from the civilian space into the dual use or even full-on defense domain. Could you tell our audience how easy is it to do this? What are some of the barriers? What are some of the obstacles? And how successful are these transitions?
Hi, everyone. First of all, to start off with, it's super hard, but everyone should do it, because for the time being, and probably for at least 5 up to 10 years, it will be the most hot topic ever out there. So if there are any kind of founders just thinking about whether converting into dual use or full defense tech, this is definitely a way to go, because there's going to be loads of money on the investment side. Definitely the scenery is going to be changing, and a lot of opportunities that weren't there like 5 years or not to mention even 10 years ago. So it is very interesting. But coming back to the topic, so how hard it is. So of course, yes, as mentioned, it is hard, because if you're going for full defense tech only, so the go-to-market is super long, as it tends to be on every deep tech domain, basically. The sales cycles are long, but still it is very rewarding as well, because it's like with high barriers to get in and high barriers to get out as well, in a positive sense. So it's going to be a struggle for some of the founders, whether to start up as a dual-use company, at some point convert into one vertical only, to decide whether you're going to be full civilian startup or full defense startup, or there's going to be a split somehow between the companies. So There are ways to move around, but definitely if you haven't figured it out yet, what kind of founder do you want to be, I'm telling you, you want to be a dual-use founder.
And maybe as a brief follow-up, of course, the tragic reason why this is such a hot topic and why there is so much money pouring in and why our entire understanding of investing in defense has been altered is an event that everyone feels very closely in this region, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Could you tell a bit about that, how this war has kind of galvanized investment in defense? What sort of trend are you seeing in this regard?
Yeah, when we started building NATO Diana dual-use program like 3-4 years ago, the landscape was totally different. So it tended to be rather hard to convince founder societies that founders should be thinking about like full defense or dual-use companies. It was even harder to convince any of the investors that they should be on board. And then when the war broke out, a tragical thing, of course, but what it brought along was actually a total mind shift. So initially we saw that a lot of investors wanted to help somehow by donating money or equipment or anything that they could do. And then the startup ecosystem started to think as well, so okay, I have built a SaaS company previously. What is the skill set that I actually have that could be deployed in that domain? So now we are facing basically every day when I go out, I see new founders approaching me saying that, hey, I don't know anything about defense tech, but I would like to know. So what I need to do in order to be active in the domain.
So if you are one of these people, make sure to hunt down one of our speakers afterwards. Nicholas, maybe we can build on what Kadri said. Clearly, interest in defense and dual-use tech is on the rise among investors and entrepreneurs in Europe. But do you feel that this interest is kind of, for now, confined to like writing cute articles and having networking events and nice conferences? Or do you feel that there really is substantial movement with the actual investing?
It's a good question, Jack. You already know where I'm going with this one. I think I liken it to...
Into the mic? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I liken it to kind of a crawl, walk, run methodology is how we think about things in defense. Crawls, you're starting to have some thoughts about, you're starting to look into it. Walking is a little more interesting, and running is you're actually able to demonstrate a specific capability. When it comes to dual use in defense tech, if you look at the US market, you have over 33 different funds that either wholly or predominantly invest at the early stages to early growth, I guess you could push at a push in defense and dual use technology. In Europe, there's one specialist fund, that's ourselves, MD1, and there are really two larger, basically generalist funds, Project A over here, and one other out of Central Europe. Outside of that, you have a few people kind of dipping their toes in, and the challenge is you have now, at last count, half a dozen different networks or groups that are saying, oh, we're interested in defense, let's talk about this, let's highlight, let's share companies, and that's great. But at a certain point, private capital needs to get off the sideline, and for all the people who belabor US or Chinese dominance in certain markets, that's the same thing as defense. Defense can be fairly esoteric when you look at, we love our acronym SOUP, we love talking about the warfighter and things of that nature, but at the end of the day, it's about producing financial returns and transformational technology. And right now, Europe is lagging behind. There's no two ways about it on that front. So while I'm glad to see a lot of new specialists who are trying to raise funds or are saying that they're doing it, or generalists who are talking about and establishing these networks and sharing deals, at a certain point, it's time to you either deploy your capital and you actually make a concerted bet on the ecosystem, or you don't. And I think, unfortunately, there's too much of that defense washing going in. Because actually, I will say, I'll take one opposite stance on what Kadri said. If you're an investor, if you're an entrepreneur and you don't have any background in defense, you're like, I want to go do it. I would say, don't do it. Absolutely do not do it. Because if you're trying to make money, you're trying to just have a quick impact or an exit, there are a lot easier ways to do that. defense has much longer sales cycles, as Kaj rightly highlighted. You, as we kind of look for our founders, you have to be willing to run through a wall. So if you are a generalist, or you have a tech background, you want to try defense, that's fantastic. There are a lot of good tech companies that are starting in Europe with founders who have the exposure, understand the sales cycles. Go spend a year with them. Go spend 2 years as a founder's associate, like Jack, Project A has a program like this, a few others do. Go work in one of these portfolio companies to get firsthand experience, because getting firsthand experience when you're doing your own startup is a quick way to burn through all your capital and your investors' capital. So I'll put that out there.
And so just as a follow-up, so why are we so behind the Americans in this regard? What are the problems that characterize this European ecosystem?
Well, first I would say there is no European ecosystem. When you look at Europe, it's 30 fragmented markets, and you can say that about a lot of different ecosystems out there. Defense is even worse. And I say it because not only do you have, yes, these supranational organizations like the European Union, and NATO obviously being an intergovernmental organization there, you have all these different national markets, and while some national markets are open to, hey, we're going to buy whatever the best solution is out there, others have what we call landed requirements. So you take a certain Western European nation that is very prideful on this. If you want to open up and sell defense solutions in there, you can, but you better open up an office. You better hire X number of people first, commit to X number of years of growth afterwards. And for any startup, that's a high CapEx exposure, and it's not going to be a good use of your capital. So it is various markets that do not always align and are not equally as attractive. So when people come to me and they say, from a European perspective, we want to be the European Palantir or the European Anduril, Anduril being the leading defense tech unicorn in the world, valued at over $9 billion now, despite being founded less than 6 years ago. That is the first way that I'm like, this person does not know what they're talking about. You have to go for specific markets in order to grow in there. The second piece of this is largely the second and third order effects of the ESG regime. So you have had aerospace and defense stocks on the public markets, as well as obviously on the more private markets, be it traditional private equity or indeed venture capital as a subsegment, excluding defense and aerospace writ large because of a range of things. Now, is it because you don't want to be involved in defense? There are even ones where they exclude them because vehicles they produced weren't green enough. And that exclusion has harmed the big companies, like I referenced in a talk I gave the other day, Rheinmetall not being able to be traded on the DAX. That's limited their access to capital, that's made it have a lot more volatility, and limits their growth. And so ESG itself has really restricted that. And I guess my somewhat contentious point, as Jack's heard a number of times before, is if you are not investing in protecting your populace, be it from misinformation or indeed actual kinetic invasion, then the rest of your ESG portfolio frankly doesn't matter. Because if you can't protect them, I don't care if you're focused on human rights, if you're focused on minority rights, if you're focused on safety of your populace, democratic values, if you can't protect from that interference or an actual invasion, who cares? It just doesn't end up mattering in the end. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the biggest barrier within that ecosystem.
Jack, I promise we're coming to you, but Kadri just gave me a glaring look and she wants to respond.
I wanted to say that it's a numbers game, and it's a chicken and egg game as well, because Nicholas was mentioning that there's a lot of VC funds investing actually in US in the defense tech domain as well as in the dual use domain, and there are only a handful of those in Europe. There will be in upcoming years dozens and dozens of new such funds, I would say even in the CE region, because a lot of people are raising funds for that matter. And coming back to the numbers game, so in US only, the Wall Street Journal has stated that during the past 3 years, the investments from the VC side into defense tech startups has been up to the scale of $100 billion. Haven't validated the fact, but it's out there. So, and coming back to the European scenery, so we are talking about that the EIF is investing 175 million euros for basically growing the ecosystem on the defense domain. Of course, on the European Commission side, yes, it is. I do really admit that it's a fragmented market, but still a lot of good initiatives regarding the EDF, as well as on the European Commission side as well. It has been stated that the reach should be around 100 billion as well. So a lot of new money still coming to the market.
So I add a little bit in saying that the EIF's involvement in this ecosystem, and EDF as well, really has been very, very strong and powerful from a top-down perspective, right? So they see, obviously, a consolidated Europe market, consolidated investment base, even the founders who ideally want to sell to multiple countries. The flip side of that is the procurement cycles and procurement mandates, some official, some unofficial, from the various European countries. I think they need to be a bit more open towards procuring potentially from other countries in Europe, the neighbors even. That, I think, still needs to catch up quite a bit. That
Which countries would those be, Jack, specifically?
I don't know, one of the big three, that's not Germany or UK. And they will roughly, that will drive revenue for the startups in building the space. So the primes are probably okay, the large contractors, they reach scale, the strategic advantage, I know government's going to say no to them, like the Leonardos or the BAEs of the world. But for the smaller players, there's still a lot of stigma around just the dynamics of a fragmented market. So I think once that gets overcame to the same extent as EIF would for their investor base, then you have a very consolidated European purchasing power, purchasing pattern, and the capital will flow a lot more, I guess, dynamically to the areas of need, most likely around probably the Baltics region first, because this is the frontline, quote unquote.
I know we're getting off kilter, but I do want to throw one thing onto what Jack said here that I think is really important to recognize. So yes, the EDF and other aspects have been really powerful actors in the space. However, if you look at it, despite the second invasion of Ukraine, EDF last year had its least number of cross-border projects that has had in the last decade, which you'd expect to be the complete opposite. And at a certain point, there are entrenched interests, shall we say, from certain countries that have limited this, and we understand that that's always going to be a bulwark. With that said, at a certain point, and this is against the fundamental DNA of the European Union writ large, and indeed NATO, given the way they operate, and I think both are huge actors and critically important for the sector, but it's going to have to pick winners and losers eventually. You're going to have to, if you want companies to be able to scale and to be able to reach those venture rights, it can't be, we are going to do mass consortia, these big wins are going to be 15 million spread between 5, 10, 15 actors. It has to be big contracts taking big bets on individual European players, agnostic of geography. Now, politically, do I think that's likely? Absolutely not. Do I hope it happens one day? Absolutely.
Jack, Nicholas opened a can of worms with this question of,
That's not a lot, yeah.
of scaling up in Europe. Do you think we will ever have a European SpaceX or a European Palantir? And what would the road to that look like?
I think the current leader in the market for something on that trajectory will probably be a Helsing.
Yeah.
That will be, so far, probably the plan for them is to build a pan-European defense tech unicorn. And for them to do that, they have separate officers, separate legal entities. The investor base had to invest in each of these individually at a time just to navigate around that fragmented European political market. Not so much a capital. The capital is a very consolidated view on a pan-European scale. But ironically, the purchasing patterns and the procurement cycles of the governments, the MODs, right? So I think there will be one at scale to have to navigate through this. If I look at how the current primes operate in Europe, like the Rheinmetals in Germany, BAE Systems in the UK, Saab in Sweden, the rest of them, they've done this fairly well, but over a period of 50, 100 years potentially, a long time to consolidate this market. And this was during a period where the American market also consolidated by government policy to be, quote unquote, create these primes for centralized efficiency. It will take time, I think. Venture capital is a tool that could help a lot with that in the case of all of our portfolio companies, in our cases, and people sitting here as well. But it will not be as fast as, say, a Uber or a Bolt, for example, to go into these markets and consolidate.
But I would dare to rephrase the question. Not necessarily we need a European Palantir, but probably we're going to have a European Anduril. So, and this could happen easily.
Kadri, actually, continuing with you, you have as I understand, around 15 years of experience in the public sector, and now you work at NATO's Diana. Could you tell a little bit about how NATO, a large, bureaucratic monster, approaches collaboration with the founders, with startups? We've heard some shade being thrown at, some of the European Commission's mechanisms. How does NATO approach this?
Actually, the Diana grew out from the very precise reason, because the innovation on the previous panel, it was stated very clearly that the main source for nowadays innovation has been, the root has been on the space domain, or the defense domain, basically, previously. So every one of us, we are using cell phones with cameras, space tech, pure space tech, basically. So, NATO felt that they are missing out of this civilian innovation, and it's flowing paths, and they should definitely tap into it. So it's a huge opportunity to miss out, and this was actually before the war broke out. And now, as I stated, the ecosystems have changed tremendously. We are experiencing it throughout the CE region at least, but beyond as well. So there is a lot of interest, and I truly disagree with Nicholas, because he said that don't go into the defense domain, it's super hard. It is. It's like a maze. And if you want to earn some really fast bucks, so definitely don't do it. But if there's something that's driving you, if you want to actually do something to have a more secure future, then definitely this is your chance. If you want to be an entrepreneur, you are kind of mission-driven as well, and there are ways to maneuver around it. So this is very much the reason. So we want to see dual-use companies for the reason that the defense only, it's super hard, the valley of death is super long, so the companies simply run out of the money to mitigate the risk. And probably what's going to happen in the investment landscape as well, that the majority of the full hardcore defense funds will be partially or fully funded by the governments, and the majority of the private equity flows into dual use. So, and you can disagree with me now.
So I actually don't think we disagree that much on there. My point was around if you're looking to make money, which I think you did agree with. The second piece is, if you are mission-driven, you want to do something in defense but don't have the background, my guidance is, yes, go into it. Don't do your own startup first. Go learn how the beast operates. Go spend some time at your respective civil service. Trust me, they need you and they would love to have you with a technical background. There are things like in the US, the Defense Digital Service, in the UK, number 10's digital unit, and there are varying degrees like that where, heck, if you have a really good technical background, go work with Diana, go try to get a role at the NATO Innovation Fund or even within NATO's bodies themselves, so you understand how it operates, because it is a very different beast, or within your national governments, in terms of how procurement works. But going in blind, I think that's where I am. Don't waste your time and money if you do not have either a good co-founder who understands it or you understand it yourself.
Yeah, but definitely. But the cycle doesn't have to be super long, because at Diana we are walking our startups through that maze within 6 months' time, basically. So it is tangible to actually validate your tech with defense within the time frame. So, and not, of course, I'm not saying anything about the sales cycles, because that one takes a lot of more time.
Yeah, the one thing I will say, and this is where I will disagree with you though, is around defense tech and dual use. So we invest at MD1, we've done 13, soon to be 14 across Pan-European plus Israel. And when we look at it, yes, our ideal situation is for a company that has a defense first use case, but has, with either little or no modifications, the ability to sell into commercial markets. Yes, that's the ideal. However, kind of a contrarian take is within pure play defense. We will do that. But within pure play defense, if you actually look, the common wisdom is, yes, be commercial first, you can kind of sell defense. If you look at the banner companies that have operated in this space, so we look at Palantir Technologies, who IPO'd a number of years ago, SpaceX, Anduril, Shield AI, Hawkeye 360, Helsing over in Europe, obviously out of Germany, Labras Technologies out of the UK. All of the, or Rowden, for a matter of fact, all these are defense first and defense only for the majority of their time. Palantir didn't have its first true commercial product till 2012. They were founded back half of 2002, so decade. SpaceX, while everyone talks about how NASA supported their launch, NASA still being government and pseudo-military, the US Air Force and one of the US intelligence community organizations were their only customers for their first 3 years as they were going in, and they never had their first commercial launch until almost 8 years into their cycle. Anduril still hasn't done a single thing. Helsing, who talked about doing commercial, has actually gone even harder into the paint, direct to government. Shield AI, same thing. So while the common wisdom is, yes, you should have tons of commercial, actually, if you look at the really outsized returns, and obviously only one's had a liquidity event so far, it's actually defense first, if not defense only. So I think that is the one thing. Now, if you're smaller companies, are there benefits to doing commercial? Absolutely, and I think the ones as we prioritize would be those that have both. I do just challenge the conventional wisdom because I don't think that there are the results out there in the market from either a liquidity event or later stage venture who justify being, hey, you have to be dual use.
I would challenge that most of what you said is American.
Yeah.
I don't know if that applies to Europe.
But we're also 3 to 5 charitably years behind the US on this one.
One of our companies, Quantum Systems, started actually in basically Savif. It's a fixed-wing drone company, Series B now, maybe Series C soon. They started doing large area surveying for NGOs, farming, agriculture, and things like that. They, of course, had a few sales in the military, and then, of course, the Ukraine war happened, and then now it is more biased towards that revenue stream. That was very an acute kind of thing. And they're now selling to the normal German armed forces, Australian Defense Force as well, right? I will say in a consolidated market in America, that will probably be it, where defense spending is more easily taken up by 1 or 2 players in the 300 million population market. In Europe, I wonder if the dual use case or the non-military track there, the sales cycles is faster, we know that. Could that bootstrap the more fragmented sales cycle of the European MODs, and therefore would be a pure play dual use case?
Yeah, so I obviously quantum's a fan. Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, something we don't know the answer to yet. I would say with quantum, I would be interested to hear, and obviously it's one of your companies, and they're doing a fantastic job across Europe and obviously further afield, how much of their revenue now comes from defense. And I would say that they're the exception that proves the rule because of Ukraine. Had Ukraine not happened, does quantum ever get as big as they are? Do they have all the majority of their revenue? I'm guessing maybe 80% is defense now. Do they ever get there without Ukraine happening going into defense? They were a moderately successful commercial company that became exponentially more successful. Yeah. And if you look at the UK, let's say use the UK or even the French markets, it's been the pure play. Now, we haven't seen unicorns out of those markets yet, outside of Improbable, which we're not going to talk about here. But I would say that's kind of the exception. But I think it's a lot to play for now, and how the European market evolves is going to be uniquely European. And a lot of it, I think, will be driven by the tyranny of democracy. I think there is a greater impetus to act here in the Baltics, in Scandinavia and Poland, and the UK, kind of somewhat oddly, compared to other parts of Western Europe. And then obviously Germany is a different beast in and of itself for good and for ill at the same time.
So I actually wanted to ask maybe Kadri, but also maybe other speakers, having been exposed to hundreds, if not thousands, of ventures over the years. The examples thus far surfacing in our discussion have tended to be very kind of Western European-centric. Do you maybe have any successful examples or success stories from the Baltic region?
On the defense domain, it has been in the shadows, I would say. But if you mentioned that we haven't had unicorns in that domain coming from Europe, yes, of course. But we have unicorn founders taking interest into the field now. And definitely a Bolt founder leading the way with his example, basically. So I am really passionate about the domain and a true believer that we will reach. Unfortunately, yes, I have to admit that, no, we are not there yet. But due to the fact that basically, none of the conferences at this point take place without some kind of defense tech topic in it. So it reflects back, basically. It means for something for the community, and the community is taking interest. The investors are taking interest. So we are experiencing a very, very rapid change in that domain. So a lot of new founders, a lot of new, probably if we would have the same type of panel within a year's time, there would be, I would assume, around
a better moderator.
I would assume around like 15 new funds at least investing into that domain, because there's so many people raising money for investing into dual use and defense right now. So hopefully at least 15 groups manage to do that.
I'll second that, in that I think we're at least in Europe, we're at the beginning of this category as a whole. I think America is probably at the peak of the hype cycle, if just not a bit earlier, but here definitely we're just getting started. We've seen a project the most amount of founders building in space than we ever have, that we're kind of running out of resources to look at everybody, to be honest with you, in terms of startups. We see a disproportionate amount of folks building in the Baltics compared to some of the bigger countries. We talked to a lot of companies, startups, founders in Ukraine. Not all of them Ukrainian, mind you, in the markets, building today for the markets, being tested live. And we see that product iteration being significantly faster than you feel to build the same technology out sitting in, I don't know, UK countryside, for example, which I've also seen, right? Exact same technology, demining, for example, using drones, being iterated so fast and so accurately and tested live in Ukraine. So we see a lot of opportunities in that space. And the next, I guess, wave of purchasing for those technology will be around then everyone from Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Slovakia, so down that region, right? So why we're here.
So this is
And actually, I just wanted to mention, it's not only like a one-way street stating that the founders or the investors are taking into interest in the domain, but actually the buyer side is changing as well. So yes, of course, it's a still fragmented market, but there's a lot of talks how to actually collectively buy something within the European Union. So a lot of innovative procurements out there, basically, they are thinking about how to shorten those go-to-markets, how to shorten the procurement cycles. So it's not like the governments are like sitting out there and we have to state that, okay, it takes tremendous time.
So this is actually an excellent segue into the final stage of our discussion. We've talked about the sources of funding, the mechanisms of funding, the problems and the strengths of the ecosystem and so on. But let's talk about what is actually worth investing in the defense sector. It's a question that I would like to pose to each of you, particularly kind of vis-a-vis the case study of Russia's war against Ukraine. In your view, what has this war taught us about modern warfare, about the role of technology in modern warfare, and what technology is worth investing in? Nicholas, maybe we start with you.
Yeah, sure. It's a challenging question because there are a couple different lessons. One thread that I want to pull on in answering this question is something that Jack just brought up there, which is the pace of technological change, but also in the iterative nature of warfare and indeed production within defense. So traditionally, if you look at how long the development cycles are for major multi-mission assets, so things like modern, fourth, fifth, and sixth gen fighters, theoretically, as well as main battle tanks, they have decade-long procurement and development cycles until they're deployed. What the second Russian invasion of Ukraine and the Ukrainian response afterwards has taught us has been the need to deliver not 100% solutions 3 years from now, but 60 or 70% solutions now, and that can be iterated on. The challenge is also that if you're developing and delivering those solutions, you have to be responsive to the end user. The thing where perhaps some of the American defense tech giants have not proven themselves well, they developed solutions in a vacuum on things that they thought would meet a need or were cool or were cutting edge. When they delivered in the Ukraine, some of them worked, some didn't. The ones that worked didn't work for long because of how quickly basically the pace of the threat environment changed, and the ones that didn't, they in some cases didn't provide ongoing support. So there has to be a larger, think of almost as a modern version of customer success manager in there, by having to be iterative and developing with your end user, your warfighter. That's why we at MD1 are really proud about our relationships with different test facilities, including the UK Battle Lab, where we are able to actually get in the hands of end users in real test environments. And our companies are not just testing it as well, but are operationally deployed in active conflict zones around the world. The other part of this, so what's interesting, now this is where I guess I'll be controversial once again. If you are thinking about doing another FPV drone out there, you are effectively, to use an ice hockey metaphor, because I love ice hockey, you're skating to where the puck is rather than where it's going. Trying to develop the next, to be the European Anduril or Palantir, trying to develop the next FPV drone, okay, sure. But what's really transformative are the things that aren't being done. There are more STEM graduates every year in Europe than all of North America combined. So there is the talent here, but don't go after a copy. Doing something that's transformational based off of these lessons learned in Ukraine, because they're going to be applicable in the short term to this fight and whatever ends up happening after some kind of détente or a win on either side, but also for future fights down the road, such as a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan, other kind of belligerence across the Indo-Pacific region, or indeed ongoing threats from both state and non-state actors throughout the Middle East. So what I get really excited about and what we're really investing in are those that are transformative nature, that allow more real time and not just reactive, but also not just driving a single insight, but an actual differentiated impact that can be iterative in terms of not just its initial development, but its progress as it goes forward. So when we look, it is those who are doing something that's truly transformational. I would rather bet on really audacious founders who are willing to run through a wall than someone who's going, I'm going to develop a slightly better widget, which unfortunately is a lot what's going in. The last piece here, and I think it's all starting to get thrown around in the case of obviously Bolt, or indeed the case of Daniel Ek with his backing of from Spotify backing Helsing. There's some kind of pejorative things like, well, they're backing it, but you need to be rich to be able to back this. And yeah, to be honest, if you look at the US ecosystem, that's how a lot of them got started. But that's what's really gonna be critical, is getting civilian money or non-traditional folks who did have unicorns across Europe in completely unrelated areas, but they're going to be really critical from a talent and a capital standpoint in seeding this next, area. So I think that's a really critical thing to point out, where companies like Bolt and the alumni that came out of them, people that came out of Spotify, or people that came out of a variety of unicorns in other complete unrelated areas can be catalysts for this ecosystem, as long as it's paired up, ideally with founders and folks who have that differentiated knowledge within defense and mil.
If the question was where to invest, I'm answering from the dual-use side. So we do invest in dual-use tech companies, but due to the reason that I'm coming from Estonia, definitely do invest in cyber defense. So definitely on the rise now, and super important as well. AI goes like cross-sectoral, so probably there's going to be like close to zero non-AI companies on the market in the near future. And I would say I totally agree with you that you have to be on your toes and invest into something that is an actually cutting-edge technology. But on the other side, like 180 degrees on the other side, it makes a lot of sense to build cheaper, different kind of autonomous systems as well. Underwater, on the ground, in the air, so with high volumes. So this is definitely one of the learnings that we have received from Ukraine as well. So not only super expensive stuff that you need, but with high volumes, solid things, and this would be definitely one of the advices. And think about how you could actually avoid system integrators. So that wouldn't be your only go-to-market strategy to go through the 5 primes or something. So what is in your tech that you can actually use and make kind of capability out of it in order you would be able to sell for the end users directly?
My answer is pretty much the opposite on Nick's and pretty direct. Drones. Just drones. Drones-related stacks. Everything from the drones itself in the air, in the land, in the water. 2 out of 3 companies that we backed at some kind of autonomous drone systems, full stack, to connectivity of these drones, to the command and control centers, network resilience, network redundancies around that. A lot of these drones, the biggest problem today in Ukraine is that they're getting jammed or electromagnetic wave attacked by the Russians. Right? That kind of technology still isn't effective today in terms of countering that or flying through those environments. And then also, of course, the manufacturing process of these drones. So Iran's producing these by the masses very, very cheaply. Europe, as far as I know, doesn't have nearly as much production capacity of these things. And if we were ever to turn into a war economy, our production base is lagging behind. So everything around automation of producing these drones, it could be a very point solution, it could be very generalist of a manufacturing process. But everything in Ukraine, the Ukrainian war today tells us that drones is a predominantly a new feature of war that we had never seen at any other battlefield, and that no European army today is really prepared for it. The other counterpoint to that, though, I'll add is that most of the European primes started producing these as well. Because these guys are not sitting still making tanks all day. They're also doing R&D, and they are looking at counter-drone technology. And this category is commoditizing fairly fast. That we spend all the time on projects there looking at counter-drones technology, scanners, electromagnetic wave, whatever, usually handhelds. To the point that we just went to AliExpress and typed in, drone detection, and the Chinese are selling these at 5,000 euros a pop at a backpack. By definition, it's commoditized. So the bits and pieces of the drone stack, I think, is interesting, but there's also bits and pieces where innovation is happening very, very fast, that it is actually being commoditized very fast because it's one future of conflict in Ukraine. It's quite interesting.
Well, on that note, I think as our discussion makes it clear, we're clearly entering a new era that must kind of grapple and reckon with the reality of having war in Europe, increased instability in the Middle East, in East Asia, and as a result, our entire mindset when it comes to defense and investing in defense has to account for these new realities, and defense discussions will permeate surely these conferences and all sorts of conversations moving forward. I would like to thank our excellent speakers with a round of applause. Thank you.